You want to set up a trust for your kids? That is why in this video, I am going to walk you through how. This is literally where generational wealth truly begins. Setting our kids up with a strong foundation for success is mission critical. Let's talk about what a trust is, how to set it up, the potential tax benefits of having a trust. This is so important. But before we jump in, I want you to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any wealth building information. Now, let's get after it. What is a trust? And I preface this with, I am not an attorney, but being a tax person, I have to deal with trust all the time. A trust is a legal entity where assets are placed to be managed by a trustee for the benefit of beneficiaries. That is really the key. A trust is no more than an entity that you establish, and it's called a trust. The beneficiaries are the people that are going to benefit from the trust. So if you're setting up a trust for your children are ultimately the beneficiaries of the trust. And the trustee is really the person that is going to manage the trust. And so I want to make sure that you understand the types of trust. Trust, there's the grantor trust. This trust allows a person to grant some assets to their heirs over their lifetime. There's also the irrevocable trust. Once you establish it, it cannot be easily altered or terminated by the grantor. And typically the purpose is to control assets and to dictate the terms and the conditions in which the assets are going to be utilized by the beneficiaries. And it can shield assets from creditors and legal judgments. And there's typically a lot of privacy around having trust. So you really need to understand the two types of trust: revocable, meaning I can change it, and irrevocable, meaning it's a done deal. Be careful when you set up trust. And I always advise that you get the counsel of a great attorney when you're setting up a trust to understand exactly what it is that you're doing. And trusts aren't public, unlike wills. Wills are typically a matter of public record. So realize that trusts are not public documents. No one will even know you have a trust unless you leave them instructions on where to find the trust. And most trusts do not come into play unless you typically pass away or there needs to be some type of action that invokes the trust into play. So how do you set up a trust? Can you go online and set up a trust and get some document legal service and do it? I'm sure you could, but if it were me, I certainly wouldn't play around with that. The first thing you need to do is choose between whether you want it to be irrevocable or whether you want it to be revocable. And then based on your goals and needs, you need to select a trustee. Now, I just want to tell you, being that I've been in the tax industry for a long time, and we are typically one of the first, second, third stops when someone passes away, please, whomever you select as a trustee, make sure they are trustworthy and that they are going to carry out your wishes. And realize that you can also establish an institution to be responsible for managing your trust. It can be an individual, it can be a bank, but it can also be a trust company to ensure that they are going to carry out what you've asked them to do. They're going to be reliable. They're going to be trustworthy. That is so important. Now, once you've decided that, whether it's revocable, irrevocable, who's going to be the trustee, now it's time to execute the terms of the trust and start to draft the document. Realize this is a legal document that is going to lay out terms and conditions, and it's so critical that you really vet this through with your attorney, your tax person, your estate planning person. You want to really have those conversations. So whichever way you're going to go with your trust is going to be according to what your wishes really are. One thing that I have seen in my practice is that oftentimes parents will leave their assets to their children, irrespective of their age, irrespective of their needs. They may say, okay, I have 3 kids. I'm just going to divide things evenly. Each kid is going to get a third. But what if one of your kids is the oldest, right? And they're up on their own and they're working, doing what they need to do. They can sustain themselves. And perhaps you have a younger kid that can't. Should they get the same amount? I don't know, just something for you to consider, because I see it all the time where that happens and the younger kid typically doesn't get what they need. So just some food for thought. Now let's talk about the potential tax benefits of a trust. When you are setting up a trust, you're not just setting up a trust to manage your assets. You also want to take into consideration the tax benefits of setting up a trust and make sure there's proper estate tax planning when you're setting up a trust. Trust can help reduce the size of your taxable estate, potentially avoiding and minimizing estate taxes upon death. But it's important that you do income tax planning around trust, that they're structured to shift income accordingly. A good example is if the trust distributes income to the beneficiaries, are the beneficiaries going to get taxed at their tax rate, or is the trust going to pay the tax and distribute afterwards? These are all things that you have to consider. You got to think about capital gains tax and the step up in basis if you have certain assets. For example, if you own a home, typically, in the event that you pass away, your heirs will be able to sell your home tax-free because they get what's called a step-up in basis on your date of death or 6 months post-death. What that means is, if, for example, I inherit a piece of property and say that property is worth $1 million, it would be as though I bought the property for $1 million for the fair market value. Therefore, I bought it for $1 million, I'm selling it for $1 million, there's no taxable gain there. That's why it's so important to understand the rules associated with trust. Understand when it's appropriate to put your family's name on assets, when it's appropriate to put your family's name on property, because trust can be a cornerstone for building generational wealth. It can also be beneficial to you to help if you have special needs kids. It can also be beneficial if you have children that are not quite there yet and you want to make sure that you give them time to mature before they come into assets. Trust can be a very valuable tool if used properly. But one thing I'm going to tell you about trust, if you have trust, educate your family, because too many people come to me uneducated that their family even had a trust. Then they find a trust and don't even know what to do with it. Part of building generational wealth and setting our kids up for success is giving them the necessary education so that they can act accordingly. We need to educate our families and our kids on what is happening, because too many of us are losing out on generational wealth because we don't have the education. I will never forget, I had a client, literally, her father had a lot of property. What a great man to have acquired such a big portfolio of real estate. Unfortunately, he did not have a trust. Therefore, his whole situation ended up in probate court. If you do not have a trust and you have assets, you will go to probate court, even if you have a will. It is important to distinguish between a will and a trust. A will states, this is what I would like to have done. Probate court, please make sure it gets done. A trust states, this is what I'd like to have done. And oh, by the way, I've already appointed the people who are going to do it for me. Recognize this document and don't make my heirs go to probate court. When you go to probate court, you have to pay probate taxes. So in the case of my client, they ended up having to pay so much in probate taxes that they lost the property. And you don't want that to happen to you. So now that you know what trusts are, you know there's irrevocable trust, revocable trust. Now that you know about trustees, you know you got to get educated around trust. Now that you know better, you absolutely got to do better. That is why I want you to like, comment, and subscribe so I can keep you updated on all wealth building information.